Welcome to the Coaching York podcast. Coaching York is a social enterprise, a community of coaches serving various communities, businesses and organisations, especially in York and North Yorkshire. I'm Jeff Ashton and I curate and edit the podcast in support of Coaching York's mission, which is to enable more people to experience coaching and to live its benefits. If you would like to join us, support us, or experience what we offer, please find out more at coachingyork.co.uk.
So welcome back to Mike Hitman from Community First Yorkshire. If you listened to last week's pod, you'll have heard our conversation with Mike about well-being. And if you haven't listened to that already, I'd really recommend that you do pick up that pod and have a listen. It's there's some really interesting content in there. So thanks for co-hosting with me today, Mike.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So Mike, question for you today. What does the phrase imposter syndrome mean to you?
You're asking an academic, so the academic will tamp down the academic bit and answer in one word: me. In terms of my own life, I've been lucky enough, and I didn't feel it was necessarily lucky at the time, to become a head of department very, very young because a predecessor was off sick, and I was the one playing the pass the parcel game who was sitting with the parcel at the point that happened. So I end up in a position that people are happy to put me in, but I certainly don't feel I am up for. I was not long past 30 at that point, never done anything like that before, never managed anything like that before. And I think the key thing is I was put up for it because people thought I could do it. I did it for 6-7 years in the end and saw Ofsted's out the way and all the rest of it. So if I stand back from it, that's successful. It is. I didn't manage to burn the place down while I was there. It was, it was successful. But at all times felt I'm not quite this part. I'm not quite this person. I don't, that fraudulent feeling. So for me, imposter syndrome isn't just you don't feel you belong. It's also in the face of evidence that you can do it, you're still going to tell yourself that you can't. And the academic wants to shout bandura and self-efficacy at this, but he will behave and he will just leave it at that. Is that good enough for you, Fiona?
Yeah, that's brilliant, Mike, and actually great just to almost like really visualize you being in that situation. So in previous pods that we've done, we've brought in coaches with expertise in a particular area, and they've talked about how they've incurred imposter syndrome. We've talked about it in different ways. It's come up in conversation in different ways. But what we thought we'd do today is talk to a coach who's a newer coach about how he handles this and how he works with his clients on it. So hello, Alex Patient.
Thank you for having me.
So welcome to the pod, Alex. Could you tell us just in the traditional way that we ask people to do, a little bit about who you are, where you are geographically, and a little bit about your business?
So who I am, actually just listening to the introduction about imposter syndrome, I've been an imposter for many years. I was an imposter when I was leading the performance insight division at NatWest. I had a great title, great salary, I had a lot of people reporting to me, and I felt like a fraud every day and worked extremely hard to try and counter that and make up for the fact that I wasn't enough. Then I decided actually that wasn't for me, funnily enough. And I am now on my lonesome. I started out as a coach the idea came to me 2 years ago in April. And I decided to set up my own business to risk having very little income. And it was classic grounds for imposter syndrome to develop. Starting out, new transition, can I do it? I don't have an expertise here. But in practice, I am doing it. It's going well. I've got 20 odd clients. I've got a couple of 100 hours of executive coaching under my belt, and I'm loving coming to work each day. So it's interesting how the facts of what's actually going on around you don't match up with what you're actually feeling, those feelings as an imposter.
So whereabouts are you based, Alex?
Oh, yes, the geography. So I'm based up in Yorkshire. I left London to work from home in my previous job. And my wife is a Yorkshire lass, so she brought me up here. I work most with analytically minded people in middle senior management. It's a mind that I know well from my job as an analytics leader. And these analytics types, they need help thinking outside of their own boxes, just like the rest of us.
So when we think about imposter syndrome in particular, have that as a focus area for your coaching. What drew you to choosing that area?
I think it came with a little bit of time. So at the start, I was happy to coach anything anyone that moved and breathed. And then these themes started coming out in the coaching of people that wanted to work with me. And they were talking about, I'm just rubbish. My reputation is undeserved. Any day they'll find me out, the fraud aspects of it. And I think it had some resonance with how I had felt and battled through my own career. And actually, I started spending more time studying around what imposter-like feelings are caused by and how to tackle them. I did a course with Shazad Shamin on positive intelligence, on how to manage it for yourself. And it's really important to me that it holds people back from showing up with their best selves. And it held me back. And I never had coaching in my professional career. And I wish I'd had. I think it could have been that secret sauce that would have allowed me to not necessarily go further, but at least do it with greater ease and effectiveness. I think if you stand for people achieving their fullest potential, which is what I do, this is going to come up time and again with clients, and it does.
I think what I'm hearing with you there is quite a deep level of self-awareness and understanding for yourself about how things were through your career and how you experiencing the imposter-like feelings. If you sort of maybe kind of like for our listeners, expand a little bit on any areas of that about how you experienced that through your career, how you dealt with it. And interested in listening to what you're saying about actually, if I'd had a coach, I think it would have been really helpful. Just interested into any reflective insights around that, really.
I think one of the things about imposters is we tend to try and hide it. It wasn't a conversation that ever came up with my line manager. And I think that's really interesting, that there will be many more people like me who will try and put on a good face. So as part of my job as a leader, I felt obliged to show that I was always in control, that I knew the path, and I was on top of everything. When I went into my discussions with my line manager, success looked like getting out of that meeting without her finding out that
Yes.
I didn't know the way forward. I was confused, and part of leadership is leading into the unknown. So it's natural that you won't have all the answers, but that was the picture I wanted to portray. So there was a strong element of I'm going to be found out, and that made my day-to-day difficult, and it made it harder for me to reach out for help, which is something that everybody should be doing as a natural part of leading, is showing that and role modeling the fact that we don't have all the answers and that we get the answers by working together. So I was a less effective leader for this front that I was putting on.
I was going to add something, Alex. In the world of education, it's exactly the same. Please don't find out what I don't know, even when you think I don't know that, because you see such danger from telling anyone that you don't know it, and suddenly all your effort is going into that. It's exhausting.
Sure, I didn't often give feedback to those that were higher up in the organisation than me, but during COVID, there was one leader that came into a Zoom room, and we were having to develop new products for COVID at unheard of pace without all the process. Usually it would take a year plus to develop a new product. We were trying to do it in a matter of weeks. And this leader came into the room and she said, I don't know the answers. In the next hour, I really want to hear from people because I don't know. Everybody speak up. There are no silly answers or no silly suggestions. Let's just bat it around. And the fact that she could do that made me much more open to contribute and say things that were less fully formed in my mind. And I mentioned it to her, and she said, well, I didn't know what the answer was. But it really struck me that she was role modeling exactly what I wasn't. And what I wasn't doing was also showing up to, so that other imposters could then talk about what they're feeling. And that part hurt as well. I suppose the other way it showed up to your question was an instance where I'd be sat outside the boardroom. Part of my job was to present the data storage of the board each month. And I'd be sat outside with a set of notes with lots of figures and facts and so on, so that I could reel these off when the question came in. And my terror was not knowing the answer to the question that was going to be asked in that room. And so I would go into that room, I'd sit down. The first 30 seconds, I would be okay because I managed to practice that over and over and over again, right? So that would be okay. And then the question would come in. And it would like almost physically hit me of, Christ, do I know the answer to this question? And I was on the defensive. And one of the things that when I started getting coaching, I developed a kind of leadership mindset of it would calm me down, and actually being able to listen to what's beneath the surface on that question, which I may or may not know the answer to, but I could certainly probe about what's going on. Why did they ask that question? What else is going on here? And it opened up curiosity. And I find curiosity in business is one of the most important traits we can have. And yet my imposter-like feelings were shutting that down. When I'm terrified about being found out, you're not curious. So I needed to develop a way to get around that.
So Alex, in terms of, people who have imposter syndrome, often the word galloping is attached to that. I don't know why. Every meeting I've gone to where people want to twist galloping imposter syndrome, so I'm going to use that phrase. But people who feel that way, what's behind it? What underlies it?
Yeah, rampant is another horse-based. So what's behind it? I guess I'll answer this in two ways. One way is I don't care what's behind it. As a coach, I'm looking to see, yes, what some of the drivers, but I want to see what can we do going forward to make this better. But actually, from some of the research is around family dynamics, gender stereotypes, do I fit in? And I think from the original history, the original research, it suggests this is a woman's issue. What's clear now is it's not a woman's issue. And the fact that I'm experiencing it on a day-to-day, coming into this podcast, I had to tackle my imposter of how dare I talk to other people in the world about imposter syndrome when I've got it. Ridiculous thoughts that I have to manage and get over. So it occurs to people in all backgrounds, ages, and genders. If I was to think about what may have caused it for me, I could look to my parents' parenting style as a relevant factor. When I was growing up, achievement was the thing, whether it was scholastic achievement was the most important thing. What did you get in your grades? What did your brothers get in their grades? How do you compare against them, the comparisonitis? And so I felt a sense of validation when I achieved something that had a grade on it or was gradable. And arguably that focus upon performance and always being on your game became a habit that maybe I overplayed. And it develops into something where I get self-respect and self-validation through achievement. And that meant through my teen years, through my 20s, and actually through my 30s, frankly, until I was about 45, it has led to workaholic tendencies. I suppress some of the other aspects of my character to be the best at what I can do, and I will be hard-nosed and focused, and I will get it done. It's led to me having two jobs at the same time for many years. On the side of my banking job, I tried to do another business, and that's hard work when you're working long hours in banking and then trying to do something creative afterwards. Before that, it was raising money for my wedding through matched betting. I made money that way as well on the side. I've always got to be doing something, and it is exhausting. So to be the best at what I do was one thing, and I'm only worthy when I'm doing my absolute best. Only then will people think well of me. The consequence of that upbringing, of my interpretation of that, has been that peace and happiness is quite short-lived. It's only as good as the next best thing that you're achieving. And self-acceptance is dependent upon that next success.
Gosh, again, Alex, I'm sitting listening to you thinking, yes, yes, for myself as well, as I'm sure quite a few of our listeners are as well. Thinking about that then for you now and how you work with your clients on that. Sometimes it's really good. What we quite like to do with these pods is get a little bit into how our guests work, the approaches they take for their work, and a little bit of an insight into that. So is there something you could share with us about how that flows into how you work with clients?
I think usually it shows up as a client talking about maybe self-doubt, a lack of confidence. They rarely start talking immediately about, I've got this voice in my head that's telling me I'm rubbish and I'm going to fail. But it doesn't take much probing for it all to come out. In my coaching, the way I find that we can deal with this most effectively is to help the client separate out this imposter-like character from who they are. There's a big difference between I'm going to be found out and my saboteur says that I'm going to be found out, because it then leaves room for other aspects of your character to come out, and maybe more positive, constructive aspects of your character to take the wheel. So the first thing that I would do is help that client consider at a granular level, what kind of things does this character say? And people come up with all sorts. It's the things that Mike's mentioned. If I'm going to fail, they're going to find me out any day. I'm rubbish, I'm useless. And that's the PG version. In coaching, people will say what the voice is actually saying, and I won't share what my internal imposter says, because it's probably not suitable for this podcast. But it's really interesting when they notice that they would never speak to anybody else in this way. And then they start understanding, usually through a kind of visualization of what does this character sound like? What kind of things do they say? If it had a shape, a form, a smell, a feeling, what would that be? And it's all about, how do I build this rounded character so that I can separate it out and then decide, will I act upon what this character is saying, or is there an alternative? Some people respond well to visualization. Some people simply talk about situations when it has come up the most, and that will help them get into that narrative. When does it come up the most?
I find that really interesting, Alex, because, from my perspective, up until hearing you say that, although it is sometimes tempting because I write as part of another life, something to give the saboteur a voice, a character, or a form. But I hadn't thought about smell or feeling or those sorts of things around it at all. And I'm interested in what people say or where that takes them when you have those discussions.
The feel of it. So I've had someone describe their saboteur as being like a hot red pulse. So they feel it in that moment, almost actually physically they feel it, or there's a clenching. I've had people making you won't be able to see it on the podcast, my hands gripping together. And that's their shorthand for, this is my saboteur coming out. Other people, they name it. They'll call it, the child. They'll call it, my one is Zul from Ghostbusters, that slavering dog that kind of runs around, a demonic thing. That's the way it tries to run my life. A lot of people will talk about the judge as the most common. Judges how they're doing, and never positively. It's really interesting when you start approaching it from different perspectives, because different people relate differently. Some feel it physically, some mentally, some like pictures. And I let my clients articulate what works best for them.
And what's it like to be on the receiving end of that approach, Alex? What kind of feedback do you get around that?
So I often prep my clients in advance to say, this is not going to be much fun. And when we do this exercise, I like to make sure that they're not going to go from working with me to going into a meeting with a client. It takes a little bit of time to come back. Now, it is quite a physically draining exercise, putting yourself back into those situations where your saboteur, that inner critic, comes out most strongly. And actually, I ask them to really take on that physicality, but in that scene, to remember how you were holding your face. What was your face like? What were your shoulders like? How were you standing or sitting at that point? To really get into the physicality of it. And that can be a little bit tiring. I let them know about that, but I also have an exercise at the end, a kind of relaxation exercise of warm tropical rain washing over you. And we go through that kind of exercise to bring them back to a calmer state. And I think that has a couple of benefits. One is that they realize what their saboteur and inner critic looks and sounds like, but also that they are able in a very short amount of time to switch mindset, to switch to a much more calm and an open state of mind. So what's it like being on the receiving end? It's insightful in that they learn about their saboteur. It's eye-opening to see that you went from this kind of most critical self-loathing, might even be the word for occasionally, to a more open, warm, and positive state again. So it's a real journey, was what I say, and that's why it can be tiring. And I had a client yesterday saying at the end of the session, that was really tiring, Alex. You asked me questions that nobody else is asking. And I said, well, that's what you pay me for, to help open up different expressions of themselves.
So I trained in NLP like a really long time ago. Part with NLP, we'll use something like help people create an avatar of what are you like in those different situations. One of the things that struck me from that where that helps people is at the point when you've created that, your saboteur, your avatar, whatever, kind of if you think about when we're in those meeting situations and we're under loads and loads of pressure, we've got loads of things going on and we're thinking about lots of things, having invested all that work and gone through that tough session, your brain's almost got a shorthand that it can default to very easily and do a lot of self-awareness very quickly. It's almost like you're pre-coding it, someone to be able to do the self-awareness at the drop of a hat, enable them to access that deeper level of self-awareness in a very, very quick to hand sort of way is what it makes me think of.
Yeah, there's a couple of things around that. So one of the questions I would ask is, what would you name this? What's a shorthand, as you say, for your saboteur? Mine is my hand over a fist, and that stands for my kind of inner leader version, which is around kindness, compassion, but also determination. In a meeting, I can access that shorthand without anybody knowing what's going on, right? I can take a moment, recenter around that, and go again. And I find that really important. So before this podcast started, that is what I did, because this is my first ever podcast. I was a little bit nervous and I thought, what if? And then the voice starts and I think, right, now I'm going to center, focus, I'm going to do a good job.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break and then we'll come back next time and continue this conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Coaching York podcast. To find out more about who we are, what we do and how we do it, please go to coachingyork.co.uk. That's coachingyork.co.uk.
Welcome back to the second part of our podcast on imposter syndrome with me, Mike Hickman from Community First Yorkshire, Fiona Smith from Coaching York, and our guest Alex Patient, who last time we heard a great deal from, and it's so good. There's a second part to this.
In our previous pod, Alex, you were talking about your own experience of imposter-like feelings and how you work with clients to address them. You were saying an important part of this is helping your clients describe their inner imposter or saboteur. And you gave us an approach you use yourself to stop this imposter from dominating your thinking. So as we explore this further, what else do you do to empower your clients to deal with their imposter-like feelings and thoughts?
The second part of what I work with my clients is, what are the triggers for when your imposter will come out? And a lot of the time people know that already. When they start seeing and recording when it's coming out, they find the habits, the patterns in there. So let's say I knew I had a podcast next week, I would know that I would need to schedule 10 minutes of time, 15 minutes of time to refocus, recenter, and adopt that better, more positive mindset in advance. So that boardroom situation, I would know that's coming up. I would expect the voice. And when it starts coming in my ear, I'll say, there's that voice telling me I'm rubbish, I'm going to fail. I was expecting you. And now I'm going to choose something else. But it's so it doesn't jump on you with the element of surprise and knock you off your feet. That is avoidable.
That really makes me think of something, Alex, if you don't, Fiona, if you're happy with me jumping in here. The over-prep thing that I am incredibly guilty of and still guilty of to this day. You tell yourself that such and such a thing is only possible because you prepped to that degree. And if other people knew, they would think less of you somehow. So you don't tell them how much you prepped. And in your own mind, you think, I must always do that. And there is a danger there that you never get to the point where you realize that actually you don't need to spend all day and all night doing the prep for this thing, that you actually do know the nuts and bolts of it and it will work. And so that's a thought process, I think, there's self-sabotaging. and also adding to you being worn out and desperately wanting to hide from people. Yes, I spent until 4 a.m. preparing for this meeting because, as I used to do with Austin stuff, I want to know what statement is on which page, and if they ask me, I want to find it. And I do it to this day. Oh, I always remember dates. Yeah, I know how. I know why. Sorry, I know why, because I don't want you to catch me out.
It totally resonates, right? And I wouldn't want any of the people I used to work with to know how much I prepared. And I also wouldn't want any of my previous staff to take away a message that preparation isn't really important. It is. It's when you start going to the nth degree that it takes away curiosity and your ability to listen, because you're in the defensive. It's when it drives your behaviors to be below the line, kind of inward looking, defensive. That's when you're not going to be at your best. And more you hear about leadership being, some of the behaviors around leadership are innovation and creativity. Good luck to you. If you have over prepared, you've stopped listening. I had a colleague who used to show up and apparently wing it, and he was the most creative person I know. It was terrifying to work with because I never knew what he was going to do, because he didn't know what he was going to do. On the spectrum of preparedness, a person like me needs to prepare, but I also need to know when to stop. And when you're doing training, if you have a script, it's not that helpful. I have a broad sense of what I'm going to do, and I stop. And that's new for me. And it's exciting. It's a little bit scary, but each time that brings in new creativity that wouldn't have existed before. But it's only possible because I've had to combat my saboteur, which says you're going to be found out if you don't know in the exact moment what that fact is. But yeah, it's a journey, and I'm 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. But I think that's probably something to acknowledge, that your imposter never goes away. Coaching is not going to banish your imposter. It's how do I manage it that bit better? 10% better today than I was yesterday.
I was also hearing something there as well about understanding your own personal style. Because what you're talking about there is that, you have a preference for a high level of preparation because that builds your feeling of confidence going into something. I'll react in a moment because that's how my brain works. And if I've done loads of preparation in advance, I'll still generally ignore it anyway, because my brain will just work in the moment. My background's in finance, and where a stereotypical finance person is very structured, very prepared, etc. When you operate in that environment and you're different, the whole imposter syndrome thing then can properly kick off in terms of, oh my God, what am I doing here? Because I just do it differently. And I'm interested in anything with clients where you've seen that, in the sense of part of their imposter syndrome is driven by trying to conform to a certain mold that they think they should conform to, when it might not be actually their natural style.
The majority of my clients are women in leadership. And when you're working on someone's imposter-like feelings, one of the things you have to acknowledge is what's the environment they're operating in. And if you are, this is not my my metaphor, but somebody else's that I heard. It's like taking a goldfish out of a filthy tank, cleaning them all up, and then popping them back into that filthy fish tank and expecting them to thrive. And some of the imposter-like feeling is, do I fit? And I think that's a real thing that needs to be tackled in businesses, of how do you develop a culture that is psychologically safe so that people can thrive. My own experience at my previous job, most of the senior management were white, male, in their 40s, 50s, looked very much like me. But the thing that was very different about me, I think, is that I have been pursuing the analytical path for so many years that that's what I thought defined me. But actually, I'm quite empathetic. I'm quite soft and fuzzy. And I was in a finance world that was not soft and fuzzy. And I was trying to adapt and model myself and other leaders around me that weren't in line with who I really am. So it's interesting when I have clients that talk about their own imposter-like feelings, is how can they not only work upon themselves, but is the environment around them conducive to them doing their best work? And not everyone has a full choice around that, but there's probably more choice than most people give themselves credit for. If someone had said to me 3 years ago, Alex, you'll be running your own business coaching, when I was doing analytical data visualization stuff, I'd have told them to get out of here, crazy. But it took coaching for me to realize that actually what is really fulfilling for me, the place that I will really thrive, it's not here, it's doing something very different. But that's not true of everybody. One of the ways that I was able to fit in better at my last company was to spend more time doing activities that had heart for me. So I spent a lot of time doing gender balanced board work, promoting female pathways to senior management. That's what got me through the last couple of years. I found something I loved and where I fitted in within the same company. So there are degrees to which the environment can be shaped by the individual as much as they must get on within that culture.
You just brought something else to mind, Alex. There is a thing that happens. It's happened to me several times in my career. You talked about fit and how we as a team fit together. It's a word that's used an awful lot. But you've been told more than once by a head teacher on one occasion, by a dean of faculty on another, oh, you remind me of me. This idea that, oh, you're a younger version of me, or I see this in you, or whatever. Now, you've got imposter syndrome. If you're paddling desperately beneath the surface and somebody actually says something like that to you and tries to make you like them, that's how I used to see it. You're trying to make me more like you. You can sit there and feel deeply uncomfortable because now you can't say anything about the things that you might understand differently from them. Or even in one instance with one head teacher, I don't want to be a head teacher. I mean, that's what he wanted me to be. I don't want to do that. So that whole thing of fit, sometimes you don't sort of have a choice. It's a very difficult thing to do. You have leadership who perhaps see everyone as like them and announce that everyone is. And if you're feeling the odd one out, you won't say, which I think is, can be quite dangerous. And actually, in some cases, has made me feel I don't belong. And hastened my departure.
I do. I once had an end of year appraisal where they were talking about, all right, what's your plans for the next promotion? Because that's what people do. They get promoted apparently. But what if that's not who you are? That I had 2 young kids. I didn't want to get promoted in the slightest. I wanted to spend more time at home, and there was a real mismatch in the assumptions there, with no malice, just an assumption.
Oh yeah, no malice at all. In fact, the people I'm thinking of were being very kind and very supportive, but put me in such an awkward position, thinking I can't say where I'm coming from now, or not as easily. There's no room for that.
I thought there is sometimes more room than we give ourselves credit for. There will be industry or organizational cultures, but we can also, as leaders, create our own culture for the people that work with you. I think that's when I was at my happiest, is when I was able to think about what did I want to stand for? What did my strongest version of me look like? And how does that show up on a day-to-day? And when I think about the impact of that on the people I worked with, I'm proud that when I spend time asking people, not just, how are you, but what are you feeling right now? And opening up conversations that might otherwise not have been there. I think that marked the change for me in terms of my leadership style of opening up conversations. And when we talk about imposter-like feelings, the first thing is we hide it. So you could start seeing, what's that barrier that individual is facing? And how can I help them clear their way to be more effective? I love that. I still love that. And that's why it's my day doing now.
And there's so much that's about the very deep link into your values, isn't there? And that bit that we know that if you're operating true to your values, you will be so much that better version of yourself and happier and more at ease and less tired and The
interesting part for me was when I was considering what was I currently doing in my old corporate job. Was I role modeling what I really wanted my children to see? And when I thought about that, that was a more compelling reason for me to change my career than anything else. I wanted my kids to see that their father not just talks to them about living their dreams and they can do it if they put their mind to it, you've got to try, but actually that I do that myself too. I think kids can really change the way you feel, but it really clarified it for me. And my coach nailed me on that. She was unflinching in saying, if you want to live your truest self, change may be necessary. And that started me down that path of when was I at my very best? And that's such a different conversation to letting your imposter take the wheel and drive you down a road that, frankly, I don't want to get to that destination.
Yeah, I remember having a very similar conversation with a coach at the point when I did very similar, actually, and switched out of a CFO role into a coach role. When you're working with your clients, as you go out to this coaching session, and you go back into your day job, what are the things that they take with them that help them to bring about that change in mindset? Is there anything that you could sort of summarize on that, you know, for our listeners, they can take away as something to ponder on?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, my clients will take away the sense that they need to look out for what are their triggers for when imposter-like feelings come up, write down the thoughts that come up verbatim. So what is that voice actually saying? And that, without any coaching, can help you identify what's my saboteur, when are they speaking. Secondly, it would be to identify what's the best version of me. What's the alternative that I can turn to when these feelings come up? And then it would be questions like, when have I been at my absolute best? What was I showing at that point? What do I stand for in the values that I have? And am I representing those values day to day? And actually just doing that work, which you can do by yourself if you fancy that, or you can do it with a friend, a trusted friend, or you can do it with your manager, or you can do it with a coach. They let you take control. And I found that once you start noticing these things, you're noticing them more and more and more often. It's like when you buy a red car, you notice that all the other cars on the road seem to be red. It becomes more and more part of the daily narrative that you're observing. And that itself gives you more and more control about what do I choose in this moment. So I think that would be the summary of notice it and then decide, which am I going to go for? My inner critic or the best version of myself? And how do I build that habit? I would suggest some accountability. Who around you is best placed to help you spot when that saboteur is coming out and help you notice when you're actually succeeding in overcoming it? And that accountability partner can be, for me, it was my wife. I asked her to spot when I was speaking with my saboteur voice. It could be my coach, it could be my boss, it could be a friend. But one of the most important things is that around imposter syndrome, we don't just hide it, is that we talk about it and know that when you talk about it, the majority of people, according to studies in the UK, have experienced it in the last year. And the more we talk about it, the more comes into the open. It's the dark undergrowth, the weeds where it thrives. So shine some light on it by talking about it. And I think if you are in a position of authority, if you're a manager of a team, I think it's a responsibility to help develop your team by talking about it and noticing it as well.
I think that's a fantastic takeaway for people to think about, because yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And you've got to be brave and be prepared to be vulnerable sometimes, just to go, yeah, I'm terrified. But I think also as a leader, sometimes you maybe don't realize how much, for example, to your team, you're projecting this, I've got it all nailed and everything's perfect. And, you know, your team look on to you as, oh my God, you know, she's just like, she's got everything covered and it's all fine. And I think I could think of examples. It's when you've shown that little bit of vulnerability and they go, well, I didn't know you felt like that. And you think, how is it not like labeled all over my face? And, you know, every time I walk into a room, and it's funny, isn't it? When you, that persona that you have to other people and how it comes over.
Yeah, it can bring out a lot of relief as well as new thought.
And develop relationships as well and trust, because you've shared something like that.
Funny how many people think these thoughts and feelings are theirs alone.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Despite so many people experiencing it, because we do our best to hide it.
So, Mike, as we're sort of drawing this to a close now, any observations, reflections, comments that that you'd like to share?
I think just if we tie some of these things together, I think that it's undeniably useful for anyone in a new position where perhaps they are relying on somebody else's perception that they can do this, and that, you know, and that may be absolutely cast iron provable. There you are, you can do it, you have the skills, you can, but the person themselves is in that position where they can't see that. I was also thinking about this goes back to the over prep thing I was saying earlier. It is possible to think that you need your harsh inner critic, that you need the nagging, excoriating voice at the back of your head to tell you to whatever, get a move on, and, you know, as Alex alluded to, perhaps not speaking all that kindly to you, and you feel that you can't actually see a way of proceeding, of succeeding without that voice. And to be able to talk about it, to personify it, which we've been mentioning throughout, and to sort of get some distance on it, actually, and think, how useful is this to me? I think there are people who may have been leaders for decades who would find that a good thing to think about. It may be very freeing, and it may open them up to things that they don't currently feel comfortable with, like that spontaneity and creativity. There was a teacher educator who, I don't have much time for lesson plans if in the form that Mr. and Mrs. Ofsted like, because some of that is too nailed down and presupposes what everyone is going to say in the room, and where's your creativity? You need that room, but you also need the prep and the nagging voice, say some people, in order to do it at all. So it is a I can see so many benefits to talking to somebody like Alex, to personifying this voice, to stepping back, and I think that's at all levels, really.
I think it's a really good point that hyper controller element of me has helped me achieve things in my career. The question I'd ask is, was the cost I paid necessary to achieve those goals? What if there was a more self-respecting way that I could have achieved that? I think there is an alternative to beating yourself up and whipping yourself to go harder. And for me, that's thinking about, is the goal that I'm working towards one that I really care about? What would life be like if I could reach out and get 10 new clients today, rather than saying, you've not sent 50 emails today, you're a bad person, Alex, you're a shame to your family. Celebrate the things that I am doing. I can achieve the same end, just with a much better life. And I think that's true of my corporate career. I could have achieved the same ends in a different way, and that would have role modeled much better behaviors for my staff to emulate. And I think that's a shame. And that's why I wish I'd had some more coaching support sooner to see that path is open to me and others.
Very thought-provoking there. So Alex, if any of our listeners were interested in getting in touch with you, wanted to have a conversation with you, obviously we will share your details with the podcast when it goes out, but what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So they could write to me. My email address at the moment is patientmindcoach@gmail.com, or they could go onto my shiny new website, which hopefully by the time this launches will be shiny and launched, and that's www.patientmind.co.uk, and they can book on there a free hour. That's to see what coaching with me is actually like. I'll explain what it is, what it's not, and that will help them decide, is it for them? So it's a pretty low risk way of getting to know if coaching is for you. Or you could let your imposter syndrome continue to run the show.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. It's been a genuinely really thought-provoking conversation. Certainly lots of things I've got that I'll take away from that and think more about. Any standout thing in there for you, Mike, that you're taking away from this morning?
Oh, I think that the personification, the visualization idea, people have done it after all with illnesses over time in a way of coping with things that are happening within them. Why not do that with the voice or whatever is driving the imposter syndrome? Get some separation from it and work out whether it's really benefiting you to think like that. It's very, very powerful stuff. Thank you.
If I could offer one last, almost a challenge to people listening. One of the things I mentioned at the end was talking about it. And I'd challenge people to think, what one person in my network would benefit from a chat about this? And if you wanted to raise the bar even further, would you consider being vulnerable about how your own imposter-like feelings manifest themselves to open up that conversation a little bit further? There's a challenge to people if they wish to take it.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. That's a great point to end the session today. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening. If you like us on Apple Podcasts, that will be amazing because it increases visibility of the pod and we can share it with more people. We look forward to talking again with you soon, and I'll say it's bye-bye from me.
And bye-bye from me.
We may as well do the same. Bye-bye, folks. Thank you so much.